Hey everybody, I want to welcome you to the first meeting of the Freedom Hub Working Group here. It's the 9th already, amazingly. And today we've got a really nice, exciting kickoff here to the year, which is with Jerry Mintz. And he's on the line here with us. We're going to kind of flick around through some of his materials here as we go. And Charles, if you'd like to do the honors of making the introduction, that would be great.
Thanks, Jeff. And if folks can, click the mute button if they're not going to speak. But later on, when the webinar opens up the Q&A, please do ask your question. But until then, go ahead and mute yourself.
Like a definite maybe.
So the Freedom Hub Working Group is an informal think tank of change agents, both in the political and entrepreneurial world. And we're a lot of healthcare folks, but since every market impacts our health, we really want to touch on every kind of market and how that really impacts us. And education definitely impacts our health, our pursuit of happiness. And each of us know people that are really change agents in different markets. And one person I know, my background as a lobbyist and a teacher, I have my master's in education, is Jerry Mintz at the Alternative Education Resource Organization. And I discovered him just because when I was in grad school, I was looking for the libertarian scholars from history on what really educates students. And I found all kinds of scholars and then all kinds of schools that have done it over 100 years and even more. And Jerry is the international and national leader of this movement. And he knows everything about the entrepreneurs who are creating these schools. And what's really cool about this call today, webinar, is that a lot of folks in this call probably support school choice, but very few, I would guess, really understand what student-led learning is, democratic schooling, free schooling. And there are a lot of these schools, and they graduate some of the most creative, productive adults and successful people that you can imagine. And as we look at the miasma of standards and testing, Jerry is the antidote to this. So I'm really excited, Jerry, to have you kind of introduce yourself, your movement, and just, maybe see how it merges with the Uber everything mentality of the folks in this call. Let's have some good Q&A afterwards. So thanks for being here, Jerry.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me, Charlie. Can you hear me? Hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Okay. Well, so I've been involved in alternative education in one way or another, probably for practically my whole life. Sometimes I trace it back to when I used to go visit my grandparents every week or two in Massachusetts. And my father was my grandfather was kind of a Renaissance man who was a lawyer and a judge and an expert on Shakespeare and all kinds of things. And so when I would go see them, he would go and I would sit down with him and he would say, "So what do you want to learn?" And then we talked about all kinds of things. When I was 6, 7, 8 years old, the ego, the id, the superego, theories of humor, the causes of World War II, all this stuff. And people thought he was crazy talking to a little kid that way. But to me, this was the natural way to learn. It made lots of sense to me that he would just ask me what I wanted to learn. But when I was in school, they didn't do it that way. They acted like they had all the answers. They didn't seem to care what I was interested in. And so that is kind of the root of my differences with the way public education is done for the most part. Now, I actually ran an alternative school for 17 years that I started when I was 25. When I was 23, actually, I started my first school, which is still going something like 50 years later. For my thesis, which was called On the Starting of a School, I talked about how I went about doing that. And basically, that's how far back my interest in this has gone. So, and after that, I was actually asked to helped direct an organization that was networking educational alternatives all over, and did that for a while, but eventually started AERO, the organization that I'm still running 30 years later, and that was in 1989. And this is the Alternative Education Resource Organization. And so what we do is we network these schools, we help people start new ones, we provide resources for them, we talk to parents about finding alternatives where they are, do consultations sometimes that way. We have a list of member schools, about 600, and then about another 200 democratic schools that are actually part of the 600. And so people use our lists all the time to try to find what's closest to them, and sometimes they'll call me if there's something they can't find. Most of these are local schools, they're day schools. There are only a few boarding alternative schools. One of them, of course, is the famous Summerhill in England, which was started by A.S. Neal in 1921. It's gonna, in a couple of years, they will have their 100th birthday. And Summerhill was one of the first schools that ran democratically and did not force kids to go to classes. They went to whatever they were interested in. And Neil died in the 70s, but his wife and then his daughter took over, and the school is still going. I am technically a part-time staff there. I am the very, very, very part-time table tennis coach. And whenever I happen to be on my way somewhere, for example, when I went to do my TEDx talk in Norway, I stopped at Summerhill and taught ping pong for 2 or 3 days and helped people top up their game. So it's nice to have a skill to teach where I can just kind of drop in out of the blue, and kids do remember me and they immediately want to have those lessons. One of the reasons I love teaching table tennis is because it is a way that kids can become really confident or retain their confidence in their own ability to learn. That's not an academic type thing. So that's one reason I love it. And I'm also a pretty good player. So the basic concept of this approach is this. We believe that children are natural learners. If you look at any kid, 2, 3, 4 years old, you can't stop them from learning. They're learning machines. And the problem is that for various historical reasons, the way the traditional schools have evolved, and I think it was for some political ends sometimes, like to create people who would follow orders and work in the factories and stuff like that. The regular system seems to act on the theory that children are naturally lazy and need to be forced to learn. And so they have a curriculum that they force everyone to learn. And the interesting thing is that is a process by which the natural ability to learn is gradually extinguished. So after something like 7 or 8 years of this, their theory becomes self-fulfilling, and you have a bunch of kids that no longer are really natural learners, know how to motivate themselves, and need to be motivated to do anything, and hard to get them to do anything anyway. And it gets worse as they get older. For example, when I was on my way to this to Norway to do this TEDx, I was at the airport and I was in the elevator, and I had a shirt on, you know, the AERO shirt that says, support the education revolution. So the mother she was there with her something like 8 or 9 year old in the elevator, and she said, so what do you do? And I said, well, we network educational alternatives, da da da. And then the 9-year-old said to me, yeah, but what do you really do? And so I said, well, we want to help create schools in which the students learn what they're interested in learning and are not forced to learn things and don't have to go to classes unless they want to. Without any hesitation, he said, sign me up. And so what this shows you is that kids up to a certain age, they know that they can do this. It's only after they're something like 13, 14, that they'll come back to you and say, oh yes, but how would I learn anything? Because by then, their natural ability has been extinguished, or at least the movement. It's not impossible. You can rekindle it, but it's never the same. And so, that is the basic difference in our approach. And the interesting thing is it periodically pops up that people will start schools that are learner-centered, that are based on the idea that children are natural learners, because I think this is simply true. And so Montessori was someone who did this. To some extent, Steiner of the Waldorf schools, John Dewey, various other people have kind of discovered this in their own way. And you can even go back to the 1830s, when Bronson Alcott started a school, and he knew a lot of the transcendentalists. In fact, I think it was Alcott who lent his axe to the guy who started Walden. Went and wrote about that. And so they knew each other. And Alcott had a little school, and it was a pretty radical school based on some of these concepts. But then at one point, he took in a young black girl. This was not in the 1930s, the 1830s. So some of the parents pulled the kids out of the school. Pretty soon he had just a few kids, including his own children, one of whom was Louisa May Alcott. And so the books, The Little Women, Little Men, are kind of based on his school. So that's, and of course, the thing even goes back further than that to, Rousseau, who wrote about the Emile, and again, based on the idea of a learner-centered approach. So people continually rediscover this, and our job is to try to make learner-centered education available for anyone. Along those same lines, I have an online course for school starters. And if you go to our website, which is educationrevolution.org, you can see under member schools, a little thing that says schools that AERO has helped to start, and it's about 100 of those schools that we helped to start. One, for example, here in Brooklyn Free School. I'm on Long Island, and then there's another one in the city, Manhattan, called Pono. Another one called the Agile Learning Center, and these are all basically taking the same approach that I'm talking about. I know that there's a lot of people involved with this and who are in this who are interested in alternative medicine. To me, alternative medicine, basically natural medicine, really does connect very well with all of this, which is one of the reasons why I had Dr. Joel Furman as a keynote speaker at our conference this year or last year in New York, last June. And because, of course, health is so important to education, it's so closely related. And how did I meet Furman? Well, 4 years ago, I had a heart attack, even though I was fairly good about my diet, but I guess not quite good enough. It was not from a narrowing, but it was from a rupturing of the plaque. And So I was in my table tennis league at the time. I had somebody drive me to a hospital. Turned out it was the wrong hospital. Probably should have just called an ambulance. But then they brought me by ambulance to another hospital where they went in, and the doctor said he pulled out one of the biggest blood clots he ever has and put in a stent, and I was in the hospital for a few days. A couple of weeks later, I got a book from one of our members who's gone to several of our conferences, and kind of well-known guy, and this book was by Dr. Joel Furman. And basically Furman said, hey, if you follow this, you won't have another heart attack. I have a diet that should prevent that. Well, so I said, okay, I'm in. And I've been following it for the last 4 years. And at this point, I'm on no medication. And I pretty much unlimited energy. My natural total cholesterol is something like 140 something. Blood pressure about 115 over 75. So all pretty good. And so I continue to follow. So the Furman's thing, at least as far as I'm concerned, really works well. And so I was pleased to have him there. There's a story that happened at the conference that I love. There were a couple of kids from Sudbury School, Sudbury Valley School, based on Sudbury Valley, which is a Democratic school in Massachusetts. And this one, these two kids actually did their own workshop there, two of the students there. And then they came into a workshop that Furman was doing. And this one boy started asking him some questions, and the questions got more and more complex. And Furman was answering these questions. And finally he stopped and says, how do you know all these things? And I said, well, he goes to a Democratic school. And so Furman later on said he thought he was a young college student. He was 15-year-old. So I just loved that interaction. So, well, a lot of other, I can go in a lot of other directions, but I think I'm going to just kind of stop at this point, and Charlie, see where do you want to go from here?
Well, thanks, Jerry and Jeff. And I think we could open up for Q&A and just kind of let the conversation continue.
Take its own course, sure, a little bit, at least, and then maybe you can get back on the saddle on something. I'm rechecking everyone's unmuted, so if you'd like to jump in there. David Demers, if you're there, you might actually have some interesting comments at the onset based on some volunteer activities that we're engaged in the schooling side of the things you're doing.
Yes, so Jerry, this is David Demers with Roads to Freedom Foundation, and I'm going to make a bold prediction that the public school bubble is going to burst in the next 3 to 5 years. Is AERO ready to fill the gap?
Well, we're always ready, but you know what? I can't tell you how many times I've seen predictions like this. I expected it back even before this millennium. The problem is that this system tends to be self-perpetuating. And the people who are in the system, it's not so much that they care about the students, some of them do, but mostly they care about their jobs, and they kind of want to keep things the way they are. There's a lot of historic reasons for that. Do you know that the curriculum that we follow today was created by a group called the Committee of 10 in 1896? And they literally, and those subjects are just still followed. So the system just is incredibly resistant to change. So I hope you're, why is it you think that this might happen this time?
Well, I base my speculation on the fact that I was surprised at how quickly Obamacare failed and cash basis healthcare is taking over so rapidly just in the last year and a half. I think in 5 years you won't recognize the healthcare market. And of course, I'm aware of the student loan fiasco, plus the fact that public school costs at all levels are dramatically increasing, not to mention the percentage of administrators among the educational force, which means that the bureaucrats are increasing in number, and the producers in the education field, which are the teachers, their percentage is diminishing. So I think we'll be surprised at how soon that occurs. The time is right, but we shall see.
Well, I think one of the things that is going to change dramatically along the same lines, I think what we think of as college and university is now dramatically changing, partly because of the MOOCs and this kind of competition that a lot of them have. I think a number of these ones will. So that change I do expect in the next 10 or 15 years. But you still haven't told me exactly. I mean, yes, those are problems that the public schools have, but on the other side, it really works well for a lot of families that just don't care too much what's happening in there, as long as their kids are out of their hair all day and they can work. So why do you think it's going to fail?
Well, I would agree that at the lower levels, that public school is used for daycare. No argument there, and that is slowing it down. But on the other hand, the minute I saw the internet come along and online education, it struck me that that is going to be probably, on the positive side, a very strong influence in pushing this change. I've been an advocate of self-education since I was a little tyke in the 4th grade back in 1952, I would say. So been there a long time, and I see much more rapid changes in the education field now due to the problems that I pointed out, plus the technology advantages of the internet and online education.
Well, of course, I thought the same thing. With the internet coming along, virtually every kid now knows that the way to answer a question is not to wait or raise your hand until the teacher says it, but just go to Google, go to Wikipedia, whatever. You'll get the answers a lot quicker. So kids know that. But then again, no one's been listening to kids. They have no power, no political power, although it's interesting what some of these Parkland kids have been managing to do to some extent, but still, you don't see much of that. And so therefore they don't get listened to. And I'm not sure again how that would change. So I'm skeptical. I would like to see it happen, but the biggest problem is it's a self-perpetuating system. It really wants to keep in its same shape. I used to compare it to a balloon. You can have somebody who's a big innovator push way in on side of the balloon and make a big change, and then as soon as he lets go, the balloon gets back to its original shape. You don't see any aspect of that having impacted it. So that's the problem, I think.
This is Jeff here. I was going to say, you're both a little right in that with the above high school age, the demise of the college has a greater likelihood, just because the cost of the infrastructure of that college and the desire to build, the one more lavish cafeteria over the gymnasium to draw people, that brick and mortar overhead. The people now say, look, I'm just coming for the education, so I'm going to get the best math teacher in Australia matched with the best English teacher in this country and build a college curriculum. that's a more likelihood than the school, because it's a local, like you said, it's like a daycare center for all the people that locally are near that school that want to put their kids somewhere for the day. And until it's horrible, they're going to keep sending them there.
Yeah, you know, and I mean, homeschooling is increasing, but it's not easy for a lot of people to do. I think it's easier than some people think, because some people who are working parents think they can't do it. But the fact is that homeschool resource centers and groups are finding ways for this to happen. Of course, it's totally based on what the laws happen to be in your state. In some states, that's fine. For example, in Massachusetts, there's an incredible homeschool resource center with about 80 kids in it called North Star. And it's for basically junior high age kids and up. And they go there and they just go when they want to and study what they want. They come and they leave when they want and so on. That's okay where they are. But in New York State, you have to define yourself as a school if you have more than 5 kids and you're doing more than half the time. So there are still some in New York, but it's partly because New York State doesn't enforce this because they lost a lawsuit a long time ago about private education. And so they just, you know, they don't really push it. But the fact is that it is depending a lot on which state you're in. But there are over 2 million at least people homeschooling now. And that may not even be including a lot of people who are doing what they call independent study. For example, in California, where the public schools said, oh my God, we're losing all these people. And so they set up these independent study programs that are basically homeschooling, and they have a teacher that stops by sometime, and they let the parents sometimes use the facilities of the school for something, but it's basically homeschooling. And everybody was worried, oh no, they're going to try to force them to do something different. But the fact is they just want to count them in their daily accounting of how many kids they have, and so they don't push them. So that's not really even in counting some of them. That kind of thing is actually impacting education a lot of places. The fact that independent study is now a legitimate public approach. So that may have quite an impact, but I don't see it happening fast. I wish it would.
I prefer to look on those as challenges, and that begs the question, what can we do to accelerate the process?
Just what I was going to ask.
Well, to me, you see, I only know one approach, and it's not the most effective, but it's the only one I know, and it's one brick at a time. Now, you are planting seeds, of course, when you do these things, but by helping people start new alternatives, and we don't really know how many we've started. I mean, we know directly that we started over 100, but we do not know. Our website is the #1 website for alternative education, educationrevolution.org. And so lots of people have told me various times, just when I happened to connect with them, they needed something from us, that they just went to the website, looked at all these schools, got information from all their websites, and went ahead and started an alternative. And we don't know about those people. So again, we don't know how many are doing this. But for example, when we hosted the International Democratic Education Conference in 2003 in Albany or Troy, New York, people going back to New York City said, hey, how come there are no Democratic schools in New York City? So we had a group get together to try to start some things there. And we had one group that was working on trying to do a public alternative and another one trying to do an independent one. Well, the public alternative school people came up with a beautiful proposal, which basically sat on a bureaucrat's desk. And eventually nothing came of it. The ones who were doing the independent one started Brooklyn Free School, which has now been going for, I think, 14 years. And what's interesting is it has a sliding scale tuition. So it's not an elitist school. It actually has more minority kids than any others. And it's very effective. So that now led to several others. Now, generally speaking, if you talk about democratic schools, people in New York City will kind of know what you're talking about. The champion of all of that is Israel, which has something like 25 or 30 large public democratic schools. And everybody in Israel knows where the democratic school is. So that's a good example of it becoming sort of institutionally acceptable. But again, it's a long process.
Is there any particular document or web page or something that's kind of a great one place to send everyone to kind of get them started, whet their appetite?
Yeah, our website.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm looking at your site. I mean, there's an awful lot on here. Is there like one particular document, white paper? I mean, you know, where do you kind of start almost? There's a bunch of drop downs and a bunch of tabs I could click on.
You know, it's a very good point, and I think that we should try to do a thing where there is some one kind of outline of step by step. Okay, you want to start an alternative, do this, and up to now, it's been mostly people coming into our school starters course, or we let people come in also to audit the course, even after it's over, and they can look at all the resources. But I think maybe that's a great idea.
Is there a video? I mean, do you currently have a video of like a lot of students giving their testimonial or something even like that at this moment in time?
Yeah, we have tons of things like that. I mean, for example, for example, on our website for members, if you go to our videos, there's one video that's called Preschool Democracy, in which I was asked to go to one of the schools we started and demonstrate democratic process. However, on my way over there, I thought, my God, how is this going to work? The oldest kid at this school is 5 years old. You know, it's funny because I've seen this and demonstrated this all over the world. But even I, who, you know, had a public school background, basically, I had some other lucky things, but I have to fight constantly against this feeling of, oh my God, it's not going to work. And so I went in there, and eventually they had all these kids sitting around a table. And I said, okay, there's two things you can bring up at democratic meetings. And we have videotape of this whole consultation that I did on our website. And I said, one is you need to bring up to talk about anything you think is a problem at your school. The other is anything you think is a great idea. Before I could hardly get the words out of my mouth, all the hands were up. And I was thinking originally I was going to have to do the make the agenda. Well, no problem. The kids made the agenda, and it was amazing. Like a 4-year-old said that she'd heard that chocolate had a kind of caffeine-like substance in it, and she proposed that maybe kids shouldn't be able to eat it after noon. And so that was discussed and passed. So it was pretty incredible and eye-opening for me too. So yeah, we have things like that. But I think what you are suggesting is something that I have to think about it, because I think it's a great idea, that one place to go to that kind of outlines, okay, here's the direction you can go in if you want to start a new alternative.
Yeah, just trying to think of how we can facilitate getting it out there. And as you say, it catches fire once it gets started, but they need something simple and sweet. Like I said, I've been looking at your site prior to coming to this call today, and there's a wealth of information, which is great. But if I'm coming as a neophyte, it's almost too much that it's like, you know, I'll have to table this. I'll look at this over the weekend when I have more time. They need to see something quick and easy just to get the ball rolling. And it's good to show what you demonstrated. When it went the public way, it was a great idea, but yet it went nowhere. And the private one, as mediocre as it may have been at the onset, at least got started so that it had a chance to live and get improved.
Jerry, this is Charlie. Tell us about some highlights for your Portland conference coming up in June. You got any speakers you're excited about?
Well, you know, this conference we have every year is pretty incredible. I don't know of any other conference like it in the world, except for another one that's related to it that it actually grew out of, which is the IDEC conference, the International Democratic Education Conference. And we have several, 100 people that will come from all over, from, we've had people from just about every state and maybe 15 or 20 countries. And so one of the speakers will be Blake Bowles, who's a young man who actually has worked with a lot of young people who want to get out of the system and do stuff on their own. And another one is a guy who started the Circle School, which is a Democratic school in Pennsylvania, and he started his school maybe 40 years ago. And the theme of this year's conference is going to be where we've been and where we're going. So in terms of where we've been, we're going to be honoring a lot of the pioneers in this field. So, for example, Jim is from Circle School is going to be one of them. Pat Montgomery, who started the Clown-Lara home-based education program in Clown-Lara School, is another one. She's, I think, in her 80s now. We'll also honor John Gatto, who recently passed away. We'll do a memorial for him. John Gatto was a keynoter at our conference at least half a dozen times. And it's interesting, a lot of people sometimes kind of got started in this field by being a speaker at our conference. One of them was not really well known at the time he first keynoted, and that was Peter Gray. And now he goes all over the place speaking, and he talks about, he's started a whole organization promoting, learner-centered education. It's interesting. Peter's mother was actually a woman who I had coming to the meetings I had when I was a Goddard College student, which eventually turned into the school I told you about. So that's how far back I knew him. So that's all I really know what to do.
Well, that was some good feedback.
Yeah, this is Earl Grinnells. Can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah, that your talk was very interesting, and for somebody like me who is a novice, there are just dozens of questions. But let me just ask this one: if you were to describe an ideal world in which everybody was educated the way you think is perfect, how many years would it take for a typical person to get to the level where they'd be ready to enter college? And the reason I ask that is I think back over my own education and what we tend to do. 12 years of high school and all that seems like a huge amount of raw time, given the data that's supposed to be taught during that time.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't think of it as separate units. So I wouldn't think, okay, there's going to school and then there's college. I think that would fade away. And I think what would happen is that we would have places where students, or maybe anybody, could go to learn the things that they're interested in or get help with resources, and simply keep on moving forward in the things that they were interested in. And once they had a better sense of what they really wanted to do, specialize in it more. But I'm not sure that we have to have, okay, there's school and then there's college. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to be a separate thing. There are alternative colleges that are part of our network. One of them is Goddard College, and to tell you the truth, there's a new president there who has actually been an AERO member. And he contacted me, first of all, to ask me if I thought he should take the job. And then later on, once he got the job, says he's trying to get together with me again. And I'm trying to work out a thing where homeschoolers can start taking courses at Goddard while they're still younger.
Well, okay, but that's useful, but it doesn't answer my question. For a properly motivated student, who in the current environment might go through 12 years of high school, then go through college, 4 years, then become let's say a physician or something. We can count the number of years that it takes to do that. There's absolutely no way, or at least no easy way to shorten that amount of time. But how much time, so I've just described one person. How long for that person to get the information, knowledge, and learn it to become a physician, for example? That's what I'm asking.
Well, that's a kind of a specific thing. Physician, generally speaking, we do want to make sure that the doctors we go to have had some training, and not just certifying themselves. But so that's interesting. If you're going to look at it in just those terms, it certainly don't need as many years as I think a lot of those years are there kind of to warehouse them and keep them out of the job market. Homeschoolers are well known to have started their own businesses and so on, and in specialties long before they're the age that they would ordinarily go to college. And even like this 15-year-old kid that I was telling you about before, there's just no reason why he wouldn't be able to go. In fact, Furman was saying, boy, he needs to become a doctor. And he's talking about a 15-year-old kid who already knew a lot of stuff. So that's, I think it probably still is going to be important to certify people, to have boards of people that can certify that they are actually able to function at a certain level. But I can't see any reason why someone couldn't be able to pretty much train themselves, and then do internships and that sort of thing to get where they want to go, as long as at some point there was someone who could certify, yes, they really know all this stuff.
Well, and I'll just make a final comment. Given how much money the United States spends on education, and given how much of it is probably wasted, I mean, badly done, if things were done perfectly right, there should be a lot of available money that is currently being used toward education that could be used in a much better way, maybe for education of a different type. But it just seems to me we're spending an immense amount of money and getting very little out of it.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. I mentioned Summerhill School in England, and when I was there once, I met a kid who was, I think, about 12 at the time, and he was interested in music and other things. And I knew him because his father was teaching there, and his sister had actually gone to a school that I ran, but he was going to Summerhill. And he eventually left Summerhill. They do have this kind of school leaving age in England, which is about 16. And so he, went from there. He didn't go to college. He went from there to go to a Zen monastery in Japan. And then after that, he wound up going to back to live with his mother for a while and work in New Hampshire, and he got a job organizing the papers of a well-known philosopher who was donating them to Harvard. And so Harvard became very impressed with him in this process of him organizing all these papers. They eventually gave him a job as an adjunct professor of philosophy at Harvard, but he'd never been to college. So he was working as an adjunct professor of philosophy at Harvard, and then Harvard offered to give him a scholarship to Harvard, which he did, and he took, and he went to Harvard, but they wanted him to go to the graduate school afterwards, but his eventually to-be wife was kind of stuck in England because she was Bangladeshi, and so he decided he was going to go to England to the London School of Music for graduate school. So he went there, and Yamaha had a contest for someone to build, to kind of invent a new kind of instrument. And he came up with something that was like a piano. It could sound like a piano, but you could also move the keys so that you could play between the notes. And Yamaha said, okay, this is no longer a contest. We want to buy this from you. And he said, no, thank you. Eventually, he has his own company now that makes these things for about $8,000 a piece, and every musician wants to get their hands on them. Has about 300 people working for him. So this is an example of when someone gets off the track, how they can go in a completely different direction.
Hi, Jerry. It's Carrie McDonald from the Alliance for Self-Directed Education. It's great to have your talk. I'm personally grateful for all the work you've done in alternative education over the last several decades. Question for you, you mentioned the Summerhill School and then the sort of cycle of alternative education. It seems like every sort of 40 to 50 years, there's this interest in alternative schools and alternative education. Progressive education was big in the 1920s when Summerhill started, and then the 1960s and 70s. That's sort of the countercultural movement and free schools. And some of them have remained, as you mentioned. Summerhill, of course, still in existence. Sudbury Valley School still in existence. But I'm curious if if you think, I often hear people say, are we just in the next wave of this trend towards alternative education? Do you think that's the case? Do you see these sorts of ebbs and flows, or do you think this time we have some staying power?
Well, I think in this millennium, the only way people are going to survive is if they have the ability to adapt and change, because of just the learning explosion that's taking place all over the world. There's no way to go backwards with it. And so in this case, I think it's just an inevitable push for self-learning and for learner-centered approaches. I think that there's no way people are going to be able to hold back on that. It's a societal push. It's a historical push. I think that's what really makes changes take place. And I think it's the only way that we're going to survive. And to tell you the truth, and speaking of survival, sometimes I wonder whether we're going to survive as a culture, or even as a nation, as a culture, if we don't move in this direction. Because if you look at Congress and how unfunctional it is, how people don't know how to work with each other and don't know how to listen to each other, they don't know how to make decisions as a group. If everybody there had gone to some kind of a democratic school, they would know how to do this, So I just do hope we can go in that direction. But I think that just the whole way that knowledge is exploding in the world today, I think there's no possibility but moving in that direction.
Okay, I'm Kishore Jetnandani, and I have a question about this comment you made about homeschool students who form businesses. Now, there is a pattern I noticed that often the people who are forming companies are dropouts. Is there something that can be learned from how they got their education, how they figured out where they wanted to go, and figured out how to learn? And by contrast, you also have people who have gone through elite universities like Stanford, they just sound like bozos. Not all, but a few.
Well, you know that Larry Ellison was speaking to the graduates of Harvard University in a commencement. He says, "You're all losers. You're graduating. You're graduating from here." He says, "You know what? I'm a dropout. And you know what I did? Well, I'll just tell you, I dropped out to do the thing I really wanted to do. And that's probably what you should do, because I'm now the second richest person in the world." So
Well, it's almost like you need to be an organizer, it sort of sounds like, because now finally there's a wealth of resources between, like you said, Google and YouTube and whatnot, but it's all a bunch of scattershot stuff that's out there. And the idea of kind of what you're doing is putting it into a place where it's all organized. So someone, like when we were just saying, where do we go when we come to your website? How do I execute? I'm too busy to learn all those super details of this, but I love the whole idea. I want to do it. What's the quick way to do it?
I think that that's absolutely something we need to work on, and I think it's a wonderful idea.
We've seen that with the health stuff that we're engaged in, now that there's enough free market doctors that physically are out there and all the rest of the loose tools, just if you can organize the consumer down a little pathway, it really can take off. and shooting the eagerness is out there. Are you familiar with like Praxis and some of those other organizations that are alternative to college type organizations? Jerry?
Alternatives to college.
Like Praxis and other organizations like that.
Yeah, again, we have a whole list of alternative higher education approaches. One is self-design, which does amazing things. They're going to be participating in the conference this year. Goddard is amazing. Goddard with its low residency, where you go there for 8 days and then you go home and you work independently. There's all kinds of stuff like that that's really building up.
What's the best way that all of us can kind of showcase that reality happening outside like promoting you or your particular event coming up? What kind of in general can we showcase that whole movement?
I don't know. I mean, again, we try to organize this stuff. We try to make it accessible to people. And,
is there a big blog that you're publishing or something like that that people can follow?
Well, yeah, we have a newsletter that comes out every week with all the latest information on it. Every week.
Where do you see that? I'm on your site right now. Where would you locate that in these?
You can sign up for it on every single page.
Okay. It's just one of those type of things. Okay, got it. All right, very good. Here it is. Yes, sign up for our newsletter. Okay, that's what you were talking to.
So that we just put all the relevant articles, and sometimes the things that are controversial, people just need to know what's going on.
Sure, absolutely, and that's the idea of the market. So that's excellent. Well, we're just coming on to a good hour, so please, who else is out there today?
This is Marilyn Singleton. I have a quick question. Had you heard about the girl in California who was accused of cheating on the SAT because she raised her score after studying?
No, but of course it reminds me of the Jaime, what's his name? Jaime, the guy who took these kids and got incredibly dramatically increased scores with these public school, minority kids when he worked with them to do, and yeah, people don't believe it when they see this kind of thing happening.
It's really quite sad, and the poor girl. My son used to teach at a ghetto school, and he said that the media was quite upset when a Latino girl got into Harvard, and so it was very exciting, the first girl from this crummy school that got into Harvard, and they wanted her to give this story about how she conquered the man and all this stuff. And when they interviewed her, they said, well, how did you do this? She said, I came home from school every day and studied really hard. They didn't want to hear that. My son said, away went the microphones. It wasn't the narrative they wanted.
And of course that's the problem is that sometimes kids who are very successful at the game that they're made to play are not successful in the long run because they've gotten too far away from being able to motivate themselves.
Interesting way to frame it. Well, that was fantastic, Jerry. We're going to want to continue this conversation and definitely reconvene after you've had that convention. I was going to say, Charles, if you want to kind of close us out a little bit, what have we got looking forward to in the next couple of weeks here?
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Jerry. This is fantastic. It's such an important issue to really break up this education monopoly and give the kids the chance they need and deserve to really follow their interests and really remake our world. So next week we have John Goodman, the father of health savings accounts, to talk about some major health reform opportunities, and then Byron Schlomack from the 1889 Institute to talk about the revolution in licensing to really boost certification, to really help folks start more businesses, which is a great issue, and it's going on in every state legislature. And finally, in January, we have Karen Kerrigan from the Small Business Survival Committee talk about all the issues important to small business, the dry engine of our economy. And we have a bunch of speakers in February all scheduled, and March mostly scheduled now too. So we're really working on April. So we have the LinkedIn Freedom Hub Working Group private group that everyone here can join and post and comment how we can use our weekly national thought leaders to affect action. And also let's be sure to meet each other, to friend each other at LinkedIn. And let's just see where this working group takes us. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Jerry.
Oh, great, Charles. And again, thanks, Jerry. You know, we just could have kept going here, as you can see.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
definitely post all of these, you know, information so you can follow up here and all of what we discussed. I'll send some links along that Jerry discussed.
Okay,
And
and
then-
if people go to my website, they can write to me from the website or at Jerry AERO, JERRYAERO, at AOL.com, and we can give you a special rate for the conference if you want to go to it.
That would be great. And then we'll want to get some information on people. Can people become members that aren't really pursuing anything? They just like what you're doing and just become a member?
Absolutely, anybody
Okay.
can.
So we'll send some links around about that. There's a way to help foster this. And then ideally in the last announcement for this, you actually probably got a link, I should say. You did receive a link on the talk that we had from Stephen Moore. So I would say definitely take advantage of that. It was very good. And we added in those attachments of the slides that had been missing. So this is great. I will see everyone next week. Thanks for joining us today.